yeah, I keep coming back to that idea of what students have to hear something 7 times before they start to believe it, or 9 times, or whatever, right? And how do we confront other messages that they're hearing, right? If they have a message in their head, how do we invite them into a better story, a bigger story? Welcome to Hallway Conversations. We're a trio of educators who have plenty of questions about teaching and learning and school culture, and we believe in the value of collaboration and reflection as we seek to keep growing as teachers. So, this podcast is our place for thinking out loud together about issues in education and why they might matter to Christian educators. Welcome to the conversation.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Hallway Conversations. My name is Matt Beamers.
I'm Abby DeGroat.
And I'm Dave Mulder.
In a book titled Visions of Vocation, Common Grace for the Common Good, author Stephen Garber says, quote, "We know in our deepest places how hard it is to keep our eyes open in the complexity of the broken world around us, to keep feeling the pains of a world that is not the way it is supposed to be, and knowing the difficulties, choosing to engage it rather than being numb by it. Friends, it's hard to believe now, but I did not know my partners and friends, Dave and Abby, 18 months ago. Slowly and over time, I began to build relationship with them in the hallway outside our offices. We found ourselves having conversations were at times lighthearted and jovial, and other times they were more serious as we helped each other keep our eyes open to the complexity of the broken world that Garber talks about. But we also encouraged each other to re-engage in that world, sometimes on a daily basis. It is through those rich conversations that the idea for this podcast was birthed, and this has become a place for us, to quote Richard Mouw, where we play around with a few ideas. Our deep hope here is to create safe space that will hopefully bring a little joy to your life and also encourage you to re-engage in a world and a profession where things are not always as they should be. And while teaching and education and these conversations can be and should be a serious business, we also try not to take ourselves too seriously. So whether we're on the podcast or in the hallway, we not only like to poke fun and laugh with and at each other, we also try to carry each other's burdens, as we think this is part of what it means to live in Christian community. If you are new to Hallway Conversations, welcome. The general format is that one of us brings a question and we circle around it and explore our own thinking. But we also appreciate getting questions from you, our listeners and audience. So if you have time in the future, please email us or send us a recording of your question to hallwayconvospod@gmail.com. That's hallwayconvospod@gmail.com. Dave, I believe today we have a question from a listener. So can you share that?
Yep. This one came in anonymously, and so I don't know who to credit for this one even. But here's the question that we had. If you could share one thing with a middle school student who's having a rough week, what would you tell them? If you could share one thing, let's broaden that even. Let's just say, if you could share one thing with a student who's having a rough week, let's maybe take the bigger picture. What would you tell them? I think there's a lot of things. My brain right away is like, I want to say like, oh, it's going to be okay. And that seems probably unhelpful, even though that is my gut reaction.
As you were asking the question, Dave, I taught middle school for a number of years, and I was actually just sort of overcome is too strong of a word, but I suddenly found myself just thinking about how hard middle school can be.
Yeah.
Like for
sure.
Any age, right? I mean, high school, university, but I guess I was specifically thinking of some of my former students there, and just like how hard it is to navigate the world, right? Like you're at a time in your life where your friend groups are often changing.
Mm-hmm.
Your body is physically growing. A lot of things just are not what you're used to in every way, physically, emotionally, spiritually, physiologically.
Yeah. And
I just think literally how it just feels like an upside down world. I would, to be 12, 13, 14, so maybe I'm just trying to buy myself time, because I think of all the things, like to say one thing, I'm thinking of all the things that I'd want to say.
Yeah.
I don't know. That's going to be my intro, I guess,
sure.
to this, as I consider it. Abby, what's going through your mind as you think about this?
I think about parenting a little bit, right?
Mm.
And also, things I've learned there, and something that Tara Bohr always says when she comes and talks to our students too. Tara Bohr is a colleague of ours who's a social worker, and she gives a presentation on trauma and socio-emotional learning to some of my students every year. And one thing she tells us, and she relates it to parenting too, and I can too as parents of kids, is that you can't get to that higher logical brain without acknowledging that emotion,
Yeah.
right? And so you have to say something like, it makes sense that you're feeling that way, right? I can see that.
Yeah.
That sounds really scary. That
Yeah.
sounds really hard.
Yeah.
Right, and I've learned slowly to do that in my parenting too, instead of like,
Yeah.
you're fine,
It'll be
go
fine.
back to bed,
Right.
you are fine.
And I'm having the kind of day, just to be
Right?
transparent, where I want to say that to everybody, right?
Yeah.
Like, get over it.
Yes.
And-
Suck it up, Buttercup.
Yes.
You'll be fine.
But
Let's
it's
go.
impossible to engage those higher order thinking skills and logic until you acknowledge that
Yeah.
emotion and kind of disarm it a little bit.
I remember when I became an elementary principal, and there was a young student, I don't know the exact age anymore, but it was in my first year as a principal, and I'm guessing 6, 7 years old, and that student had brought a toy figurine to school, and you could see like it was a big deal, like this was a big deal to him. And somewhere in the course of that day, that thing went missing. Like it just went missing. And I to this day I don't know what happened to it. I wanted to be the hero and find that thing so badly.
Right.
Because he was just so upset. Like it was just so upset. I think it was like a car or a toy soldier. It was just something small, right? That you're just like, when I saw him bring it, I was like, I just know how this story's gonna end. Like, right? And I just and it ended that way. And there was nothing I could literally say in the moment to console that child. And there was a part of me, I think, and this probably was in my own immaturity at the time, where I wanted to be like, it's a figurine or it's a car, like it's like you're gonna be okay. And looking back now, and I did not say that, but I think in looking back now, it's like, but that car and that figure for that student, losing that is a big deal, as big as the emotions I feel over something at my age. And I'm making that connection, I guess, to what you're saying, Abby, is to say, when you're 6, losing your favorite car is a huge deal. And to just acknowledge that, like this, like to maybe just say, this is hard, like this is so hard.
My 6-year-old did not want to put his coat on this morning.
In
our first 30-something degree morning in Iowa, and I had a very hard time acknowledging why that might be happening. I'm just going to put that out there. I had a very, very hard time acknowledging that coats are hard, Jace. Yes, coats are really, really hard, buddy. I know, you just want to wear a sweatshirt. I get it. That's what I should have said. I did not.
You did not say that. No, totally. But
it comes to that question though, right? Like when kids are in that emotional state, high emotional state, right? Like I think it's easy for me to say the wrong thing as a teacher, right? Like this question I think is so good. Is like, what would you tell them if they're clearly having a rough time, right? And there's a part of me that wants to just say, suck it up. You'll get over it. It will be okay.
Right.
But will it be okay?
Right.
Yeah. What if it's not?
What if it's
and
not
that's
okay?
not helpful, right?
That's not a helpful response.
No.
Yeah. And so I guess what I'm wondering about now is I think the question behind the question for me in this is, so what do I really believe about kids? What do I really believe? And that sounds like a very philosophical question. So I'm like, what does it mean to be human? And,
it's an important question, though, Dave.
But it is.
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
And if my answer to that question is, well, I say things like, I believe all of my students are unique image bearers of God, right? That they reflect what God is like. Well, then that's going to change the way it has to impact the way I respond to students. Do you guys feel that sense too, the gravity of that kind of? Because I think that's one of those things as Christian educators, we say that pretty easily. Well, of course, I believe all my students are unique image bearers. But what does that actually look like?
Right. Well, and it's hard to help. In a way, I think part of our job is to help them see that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right.
Right. Like what you're saying. Like I can believe it and see it, but that doesn't do you any good unless you also are able to believe it and see it. When I taught high school, I would see that in my students, right? Just the ability to name for them things that are special about themselves outside of how because teenagers can tend to define the world very, very narrowly, right? Like, I
Or they
did not make
put
the
those
team.
labels on themselves, right?
You know, and they take one area of their life that they have and expand that into their whole self-image, right? So I didn't make this team, and therefore I am blank.
Yeah.
Right.
Or I got this grade, and therefore I am
Fill in the
like they're
blank.
they're
Totally.
labeling themselves, right? And so I think part of that is naming for them the long view and helping them to see their worth outside of those achievements or lack of achievements, right? Even kids who are successful,
right?
You know, who, like, I saw so many kids who are excellent athletes who built their whole identity around that and then got injured,
right?
And were just lost,
because if
right?
that is
Because
your identity,
if that is who I am,
right?
And then I don't have it anymore, how do I, and so walking them through that and helping them to see who God actually says that they are, right?
And I think you had said this at the beginning, Abby, because suddenly I'm thinking is for us to speak that truth into a student's life, we have to know that for ourselves first. It's, you know, we've talked before, like, about the importance of, you know, as a teacher, or like as I teach undergrad students, hey, like this importance of delighting in your students. But it does make me realize, for me to authentically do that, do I believe that God delights in me? Do I believe that I am, as a teacher, like to say that His grace is sufficient for me, so that I can give that same grace to students, right? So I think it starts with yourself, actually, right? It starts with believing those things about yourself that, you know, like one of the things that rocked my world is you were talking about, like, as it was taken away. You know, like I came to Dordt, you know, 18 months ago. My last 3-4 months, I was part of a school for 17 years, a school I graduated from as a high school student. And the last 3 or 4 months of my time there was essentially no students in the school.
Right, because of COVID.
Because of COVID. And I went in almost every day, part of out of identity, part of out of obligation, but it was and my time came to a close there, and I felt so lost. I felt so lost because I felt like these things, like my identity, and it made me realize my identity was really rooted in my vocation rather than in my being. So my identity was rooted in my doing rather than my being. Well, for us to help high school students see that for themselves, right? Man, like, do we believe that about ourselves?
And that's a hard thing for adults to believe about themselves, right? So and you think about all these messages that these kids get every day, right?
That's right. No, that has me thinking. So way back in the day when I was a middle school Bible teacher, I used to show, this is embarrassing to admit, I used to show kids a video. Do you know Ken Davis? He's a Christian comedian.
Ken Davis.
Right. He's funny. He's clever. I had this video that I would show them. It was called "I'm Not Okay." And he starts off talking about how he's not okay, and he's a weird dude, right? So, like, let's just own it. He is not okay. But he uses that to present a message of the gospel, and he says, "I'm not okay, and you are not okay. And that is okay because Jesus is more than okay." And like, oh wow, that like just reframes this thing. Like for me to just name that, like I am not enough in and of myself. But Christ's grace is sufficient for me. And
you are not going to save yourself.
I cannot, right? There's no way. But that whole idea, like I am not okay and you are not okay, and that is okay because Jesus is more than okay. And like, how do we continue to get that message in front of kids? And like, I keep coming back to that idea of what students have to hear something 7 times before they start to believe it, or 9 times, or whatever, right? And how do we confront other messages that they're hearing, right? If they have a message in their head, how do we invite them into a better story, a bigger story? And,
Right.
No.
So this,
go ahead,
this may sound odd too, but I'm gonna bring in Taylor Swift.
Okay. I just want, for our listeners, I just want to name that I've been waiting for this moment for 34 podcasts. So I am waiting with bated breath for how we're going to make the leap from Ken Davis and being image bearers of God and Taylor Swift.
Are you done?
I am so ready right now.
Can I keep talking now?
Let's hear it.
Wow.
Okay, so So Harper, my daughter, right, obsessed.
Love it.
You know
Oh,
this,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
She's 10. She's going to be 11. So we
Yeah.
listened to Taylor Swift a lot in the car. But I was teaching. I was getting ready for because I teach a course about adolescent development. And I made my students this year listen to Taylor Swift's 15. Do you all know that
yeah.
song?
Oh,
Yeah.
Right?
You have no idea.
So if you listeners have not, go look up Taylor Swift's 15. But there's a line in there that I made them listen to it because at the beginning of the year I always have them remember things from what it was like to be an adolescent, right? To frame the work that we're going to do together.
Right.
And there's stanza in there, right? In your life you'll do things greater than dating the boy on the football team, but I didn't know that at 15. Right? When all you want was to be wanted, wish you could go back and tell yourself what you know now.
Yeah.
And it's such a good line to capture. We don't know what we don't know at 15.
Yeah.
Right.
And I thought about that in my work with my students so often. You all do not know the richness that is life beyond high school. They can't see it.
No.
And so I think that's where my passion is, right? Like to show them that, and even like play a song for them that someone they can identify with that gets like there is more to this life than the things that we are told over and over again are the most important.
Mm-hmm.
No, it makes me so first of all, thank you for that. And maybe we can put a link to that song in the show notes.
So good.
Because it is actually very profound. It is. I'm
is.
not joking.
Yep.
It is.
It's very profound. But it does make me realize, like, for our students, you know, like all the competing stories that want to shape their desires. And I felt really despondent, sort of like, they don't stand a chance. Like, they don't stand a chance. And it, you know, and I didn't, but then you get to a place where it's like, of course they stand a chance. Of course they stand a chance because there's a better story, like what you talked about, right? But you realize there's so many competing stories, and it just feels like there's more and more competing stories out there all the time, which then it becomes, for me, more and more important than, you know, like why we show them a better story. Like, you know, the Center for the Advancement of Christian Education does a lot of good work where they talk about, you know, teaching for transformation, and kind of the on the front of that of a book they produce, it talks about knowing the story and living the story, right? And it makes me think again, like, how do we get them to know to show them there's a better story, to teach them the story, but also allow them to practice, invite them in, right? And live that out. I mean, you said something earlier too, just to make it a different connection, or maybe it was Dave, you had said it earlier, but one of the things that's also been helpful for me, and coming back to the initial question, this idea of like, what would you say? I don't know. Again, I don't know exactly what I'd say. It depends, as you'd say, Dave.
That's right.
But one of the things that's been really helpful for me, that my own daughters have been helpful, that I think I'm trying to carry into my classroom and even in my life, is this idea of like, it's okay to not be okay.
Yes.
Right?
Yep.
It's this idea of like, you know what? Like, it's okay to be broken. And so maybe for me, in thinking about what would I say to a middle school student, in whatever way possible, to confer to them that what you're feeling is real, and you're allowed to feel that.
Yeah.
Like, to say, like, that's real. Like, to never. And I haven't always done a good job of this, but I think in learning and through my own mistakes, to not diminish those emotions, like, you know,
help them feel seen and validated, right?
Yeah, because it's their lived experience.
Right.
Yeah. We know the skin we walk around.
Yeah.
They know the skin we walk around.
So whether it's a you know, a lost car, whether it's a jacket on the first 35-degree morning, whatever it looks like, right, is to say, like that's real, and just to never, because I think to diminish those feelings is to diminish their humanity, which then comes back to what you said, Dave. Like, if we believe these are made in God's image, then we need to value their emotions, because we value them, because those emotions are from God.
That's how God has created us to be, after all.
Friends, we know that your time is valuable, and we want to thank you for joining us in the hallway today. Thank you for the good, God-delighting work that you are doing in your communities, and we hope that the Lord gives you what you stand in need of this week. Finally, we'd like to send you into your day and this week with a blessing. So to our listeners, whom we are so thankful for, may the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. May the Lord turn his face towards you and give you peace, and give you peace, and give you peace. Amen. Thanks for listening, everyone, and have a good week.
This podcast was quite literally dreamed up during one of our actual hallway conversations. Our music is by Ethan Mulder. Hallway Conversations is an independent podcast created and produced by Matt Beamers, Abby DeGroat, and Dave Mulder. Thanks for listening.